Okay.
Oh, I think we're live. Sean, if you want to
We're
go.
live? Sure. Well, welcome back, everyone, to our first Zoom housing task force meeting. Of course, we have not had the opportunity to meet since, I guess, March 2nd was the last time when we met in person, and a lot has changed in the last 10 weeks. And as much as it makes it more difficult to operate virtually, um, this is a high priority for council. We appreciate the time and effort that everybody's made to be part of this group. Quite a bit of work has been going on behind the scenes, especially with Carl, as you'll see from today's agenda, to help move some items forward. We had planned to bring a interim report to council, probably, I guess, at the end of April or in April, and of course that got pushed back due to the current pandemic and environment. So what we want to do today is move ahead with a number of items on the agenda, do some of a deep dive into the areas that we have been working on, work towards the completion of a interim report, and I look towards some public consultation so we can still deliver a final report to council by the end of June. So thanks everyone for your participation. Happy belated Mother's Day to all you moms on the screen, and we'll move ahead, and I'll ask for approval of the agenda, the motion. And Carrie, if you see a couple of hands up,
Yeah.
Sean and Lorraine.
I got moved by Paul Ead and seconded by Sean Webster.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Adoption of minutes. We have the February 10th, 2020 to amend and readopt February 10th, and request to amend and readopt March 2nd. Motion, please. Karen, seconded by, or is that Karen moving her cat out of the way? Lorraine?
I'm sorry.
All in favor? That's okay. Okay. I'll ask for disclosure of monetary interest. I don't see any hands or concerns. No delegations today. We have a number of priority issues. So Carl, we're going to move right to you with a community improvement plan to incentivize affordable housing. We've been looking forward to this. So Carl, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Sean. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think one of the things we've been looking at over the last number of months are ways or tools that we have at our disposal to improve the housing condition in town, and one of those is a community improvement plan. So I'll just quickly go through the memo here, and I certainly don't want to prejudge the committee's position, but from the conversations that I've been hearing, I'm thinking this may be something that would be of interest to go into our final report or even our interim report as as a deliverable, something to explore. So a community improvement plan is something that's it's legislated. It follows a legislative framework, and it's one of those things that allows us to bonus, I guess. Like bonusing, normally the municipality cannot contribute to businesses, but a community improvement plan that's specifically structured around an overall gain and benefit to the community and its social or economic condition is one tool that we have to sort of target improvements. So we do have a community improvement plan in town right now, and that just covers the area right around the downtown. And came into place a few years ago when the economic condition in town was a little bit different, and there was a very high vacancy downtown, and the CIP was used to really target development and facade improvements.
Every time Carl speaks at a council meeting with his kids, is it looking for grapes or something?
And we didn't have grapes last time, and I went back to the garden market and I forgot to eat them.
Oh.
But so the community improvement plan program that we have now is really intended to facilitate economic development in the downtown core and really improve the overall visual condition. But there's nothing in the Planning Act or our official plan that limits us to one community improvement plan. We can adopt another, and some of the larger municipalities that we've been looking at have up to 4 or 5 community improvement plans for specific geographic areas, or others like Belleville have a plan that's specifically intended for affordable housing. So we did a bit of a scan of what some comparables have done with affordable housing community improvement plans, and some of the tools that have been looked at include a loan program for affordable housing, grants or loans to incent additional like secondary units. So if to help somebody renovate to create a basement apartment, for instance, affordable tax increment grant programs. We already have something in the current CIP for large developments that allow us to sort of rebate a portion of the increased tax assessment that would come from it. That's something that we see in a lot of community improvement plans. Planning and building fee rebates, those aren't a huge part of the overall cost, but it's something. Feasibility study rebates. If we were to develop development charges in the future, then what a lot of municipalities do is sort
Chris
of
is choking, Carl.
Exactly. Don't swear, Carl. It's not polite to swear.
we
I can mute Chris.
rebate development charges. So I guess there's on the one hand, if the municipality were to establish development charges, on the other hand, we can rebate them for affordable housing. There's an option. It is a process that takes some time to adopt. There's typically a planning consultation, open houses go into it. There is certainly not something that can happen tomorrow. It does have to follow a process outlined under the Planning Act, similar to adopting an official plan amendment. But the good news, I won't get too much into the details right now, but the good news is the tools are available. We can develop a community improvement plan to incent affordable housing if that's something that the committee would like to get into. So I'll pause there and ask if anyone has any questions.
Lorraine?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I'm very in favor of CIP program. I think it's been successful to a degree in our downtown if we had a little bit more money in it. My question is, are you expecting us to carry 2 then? So we would have the CIP for downtown revitalization continue, and then this as a second one?
In my mind, Mr. Chair, in my mind, the current CIP we have, and then the one we're looking at, ultimately look at different objectives. And one is largely an economic development incentive, where we're looking at the physical landscape of the downtown core and encouraging growth and occupancy. Whereas affordable housing for the entire community, it's sort of a different priority. They're both important priorities, but I would suggest keeping them separate. Like, I think there's maybe some overlap, especially when we're looking at tax increment financing, and we'd have to deal with that through the plan, just to make sure we're not there isn't any sort of redundancy.
And I can see if someone bought one of our heritage properties, and a number of them were for sale. Well, Pauline would know more than I, but if that came up, then you could have both, technically.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I'm in favor of this. This is great. Thank you for this report.
Any further questions for Carl?
I think that it's met with success. It's Karen Bryan. I think that it's met with success in other municipalities, and it seems to make perfect sense to me. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I certainly would be in favor of exploring this.
Flip through my screen here, so anyone else has a hand up. But Carl, where they have already established a affordable housing CIP, or something that incentivizes affordable housing, what has been the mechanism most often employed?
So which planning tools that we have, like as far
Yeah,
as...
so Yeah, are we looking at loans, grants, tax abatement? What has been the sort of standard out there?
So I haven't done too much of a deep dive into the individual CAPs of other municipalities, but on the scans that I've taken, loans and tax increments seem to pop up in just about all of them. And one thing we can do, and the way I envision this happening is with the committee's blessing, we can sort of add this as a target item for our interim and final report, where we can investigate a little bit more detail in my report than what my report had about what a CAP could look like and how we would go about taking the next steps. And that would certainly involve consulting with our colleagues in other communities who are a little further down that road.
Any other questions for Carl on this topic? I don't see any hands. So I think the consensus certainly, I think is that this makes a lot of sense to take a deeper dive, to explore this further, to see which actions are potentially will lead to a better result than others, but to explore all possibilities. And to, I guess, part of our interim report would be to include these actions as a key step at this stage. Any other final comments before we move on through the agenda? I don't think I see any hands up. No? Okay, thank you. And Carl, you're back up, I believe, with the zoning options.
Thank you. Another, the CAP is very much a carrot that we can offer. Zoning can be a carrot or a stick depending on how we do it. But I think a lot of the discussions we've had around the table pertain to sort of the regulatory element of housing and what's a barrier and how can we encourage things. So I've done a bit of a zoning scan of what our bylaw has right now that pertains to housing, and then some options that we can explore to sort of open that up. And I'll just quickly go through those, and then we can open the floor for discussion, see if this is something, if any of these are things the committee would like to consider. So parking is definitely one item that has been flagged as a major barrier, especially in downtown or dense areas where that really limits the amount of development. I hesitate to allow a reduction much beyond one space per unit in the absence of transit or something else that really allows development without car usage. And that's something we can have a closer look at, just to see how many renters, tenants do need the parking. But I think what really hit home was that presentation in Guelph, or not Guelph, in Belleville, where that apartment building was used as an example, where there's an extremely expensive parking lot that was almost never used. So I think we'll have a closer look, but in the absence of transit, I'd be cautious about recommending too much below one space per unit. Certainly 1.25 is the standard now, and in a large development that is still a lot of hardened surfaces if we reduce it down to one. Secondary accessory dwellings, that's pretty low-hanging fruit for us. The legislation, the Planning Act has been amended in recent years to require municipalities to allow these in broader circumstances than we have right now. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for us to encourage a little bit of density in our existing housing stock by broadening where accessory housing or accessory apartments are allowed, and then also the secondary suites, so the tiny homes, granny suites, all of whatever, however you want to define those. I would think that we would be looking at, I would recommend we look at specific setback rules just to ensure that they fit within the community, but there's definitely an opportunity for us to look at that. Short-term rentals is another thing, and it's very tricky to administer that from zoning simply because we don't have staff who go out there, who are able to go out and investigate who's using what and for how long. But some communities, City of Toronto has looked at that, but there's certainly an opportunity to at least explore regulating short-term rentals. So we may not be too worried about somebody just renting their house out for a weekend while they're on vacation, but if we're looking at somebody who's built a housing complex that only wherever unit is rented for a month, then that could be a bit of a different scenario. Minimum dwelling size, that's another thing that we've looked at as well at the staff end. We have fairly high minimum dwelling size requirements for houses as well as accessory apartments now. And we could certainly look at reducing those. Minimum lot size is another one, and our minimum lot sizes are actually fairly high. So as a way to encourage developers to put in more units more units per hectare, we can reduce the minimum lot sizes from say 4,520 square feet to something in the range of 35 or that sort of number. We can investigate maximum lot sizes as well. Certainly, we're not going to be looking at creating large estate lot subdivisions in a serviced area. That's not efficient. So actually, my memo is a little bit out of date because since I've written the memo, we've approved smaller lot sizes for townhouse units. Mixed use zoning is another thing that we can have a closer look at. So for instance, our shopping center commercial zoning doesn't allow any residential development whatsoever. And there could be an opportunity there to investigate that. We see in urban areas where shopping centers are becoming they're becoming real hubs with high density residential. Of course, those are often associated with transit, but at the end of the day, commercial areas are key service areas. If you get housing close to that, then that's certainly worth looking at. The downtown, this is something that comes up on a day-to-day basis fairly often, is we get inquiries for ground floor residential development in our downtown core. And I think there's a very good reason why we don't allow it. We want to maintain the pedestrian landscape and commercial character of the neighborhood. But if there is an opportunity for, say, like development at the back of a dwelling, for instance, and there may be some room for flexibility, and perhaps there could be maybe the committee wants to look a little further than that. So pre-zoning for density is something that I like, specifically because we have an opportunity there. So a lot of our lowest density residential zoning is right along collector and arterial roads. So I would think a real opportunity we have is to simply pre-zone to a higher order of development along collector and arterial roads, just to allow people to develop, say, townhouses, duplexes, semi-detached, those sorts of higher density without having to go through a planning process. So I think we do have some opportunities through zoning to encourage housing, and I welcome the committee's feedback on any of these and see if this is something that you'd like to carry forward as a recommendation in our final report. So I'll end there, and I'll welcome your feedback.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Lorraine?
Yeah, I just have one, Carl. I know we talked about with Belleville, the gentleman that was here from Belleville, we talked about the parking lot issue. And when I look at Belleville, it's a very large city. And most often when they're making these things, they're making them thinking of an urban center, very large, busy downtown. In our community, in all honesty, there are many seniors that could walk the whole area and they don't want a car, and many of them don't have their license. So I think that there is a large group of people who aren't interested in a parking space, that would like to live downtown, that we lose because that's part of the issue, that parking comes with it. But just my thought.
Pauline? Oh, sorry, Carol, go ahead and answer that first.
To respond to Lorraine's question, one thing we actually do in our zoning bylaw for the downtown core is we apply a 50% reduction on parking space, on required parking spaces for commercial uses, not residential, but commercial. So one option could be to apply 50% reduction or some sort of reduction for residential development as well in the downtown core.
Yeah.
I think I'd love to have a closer look at that and certainly discuss with landlords and see what sort of overall needs they see their tenants having. At the end of the day, if somebody's building an apartment, I would imagine if somebody wants to build a residential development without parking, they will have done their market research first. But that's an option that we have to address Councillor Allen's comments.
Pauline?
Well, and I think there's many buildings that are grandfathered already downtown. So they're at an advantage versus, because I know lots of buildings downtown that don't have enough parking for their tenants, and their tenants don't require parking. I mean, Ian's building where my office sits has enormous parking, which is enormously vacant because most of the tenants in this building, because it's one of the buildings downtown that does have elevators, don't require parking because they don't have cars. That's why they live down here. And so when I look at redevelopment in the downtown where there are buildings that could have expanded housing, my thing is, I think I go with what Lorraine's saying is, you know, there's lots of opportunity for people who want to buy parking downtown. That if you don't have enough parking, it's not that the cars are going to be on the street because there's vacant spaces available in what I think, you know, should be supported, which is other home taxpayers parking lots. So to me, part of the redevelopment that may be affordable is our downtown core with expanded housing and the parking again, like Lorraine. I think we could allow parking to be different in the commercial zone, just simply because it's a different kind of animal than in a residential zone. But that's my thought.
Chris?
I've lived the parking issue in the downtown core for the last 6 months in Carleton Place, in the new 51-unit apartment building that we're gearing to seniors and affordable housing. And we've had an awful fight with the planner in Carleton Place. They asked for 1 1/4. The Carleton Place says 1 1/4 plus another quarter, so they're actually at 1 1/2 for the apartment building. So on 51 units, that works out to 76 spots. We were able to get it down to 1 1/4, so that's around 64. But in the land bank, I think 1 is the right number. One parking spot per unit is the correct in a downtown core, wherever you are. 1 should be the right number.
Yeah. Vicky? No, can't hear you.
Now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry. My only worry is that during the winter months when they remove snow from the downtown area, most of the parking lots, I might be incorrect, but I believe the one on William Street becomes inaccessible because they have to plow it. So anybody who maybe relied on that for overnight parking because of the winter parking ban would then be left scrambling.
Yeah, Pauline, you have a comment on that?
Yeah. Oh, I obviously live, my office is in front of one of the largest downtown parking lots. So that's all, again, tenants and people who have those are notified when the snow clearing takes place. And so often it's during the day, or they're told that it's between this hour, so they move their cars off, and it's really quite and the same with William Street, because it's next door to a building I sold. It's very regulated on how all snow removal takes place. I have to admit the town and the snow plows are great about letting people know when that's going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're not, sorry, Sean, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
We're not in the GTA. We've got to make sure that we don't over densify a lot. There's some lots that obviously we'd like to get as much housing as we can, but not at the expense of our rural heritage, if you will. We've got to make sure that we have adequate parking. We don't need the crap show that we have downtown now, Justice Building, places like that, where there's no parking. Like, we've still, regardless of how much housing we want to add, we've got to make sure that it's not at the expense of parking.
Any further comments here or questions? So looking at Carl's report, there are obviously a number of possibilities here, and as he mentioned, our zoning bylaw has been up for review and will be redrafted over the next year or so. Does the group agree that we should have deeper consideration for these points, making sure that we have a little bit more. I think as part of our interim report, I guess that we look further into each of these options, including sort of the pre-zoning, with the right terminology, pre-zoning for density on collector areas. And I guess Pauline or Chris, I guess, or Tracy, as an example, I guess if there places were pre-zoned for higher density on a collector, and there was an older building there that didn't maybe sat in a big lot and wasn't in the best of shape, would it make sense would it be worthwhile to see that thing possibly knocked down and greater intensification, 6 or 8 units, whatever may be a possibility there? And we look at Ottawa right now, that is looking at modifying a big change to their official plan, because they're dealing with the question of urban sprawl or greater intensification, and they see a lot of infill now. But while we're not the same as Ottawa, they are dealing with how are they going to shape the community. Our zoning bylaw, of course, will help shape the future of our community. So any thoughts on some of these points? Pauline?
It's interesting because one of the vacant lots that occurred was on the extension of Beckwith Street before it hits, Highway 15 going out of town, and where all the fires took place. And you have those vacant lots, which could have easily, there's a prime example. It's, on the way out of Smiths Falls, and could the density have been higher there when you already have a created vacant lot? But it's also, I was thinking of the site where the townhouses were on Robinson, which could that now have a higher density that would give housing? Carl, to you through the chair. Like, for example, would that be a prime example of how a higher density could take place in town?
Well, certainly. So our official plan, through the chair, our official plan supports density, especially along collector roads and where there is close access to areas that we've identified for cycling transportation. So the properties on Beckwith Street are definitely an example there, as well as on Robinson. The nice thing about that property on Robinson is it has more land than a lot of them do, and certainly with some of these lots, especially if you can assemble a couple of them together, then you have the opportunity to get a bit of an economy of scale. Of course, design is something to keep in mind so that they're scaled appropriately in the neighborhood. But places like that where you already have a fairly high capacity for traffic, it's certainly a good spot where I'd be looking at pre-zoning. And it doesn't have to be large buildings either. Even just creating special zoning to allow fourplexes, that sort of thing, whereas previously singles were allowed, that allows some improvement as well. And it gives property owners an opportunity to make the best use of their investment.
Thanks, Carl.
Anything further from anyone here? I don't see any hands up.
No, I just,
sorry.
Quick question. I mean,
Yeah.
One thing, I know that this might be out of scope for this housing committee, but it's worthwhile maybe to have some discussions with Rideau Lakes moving forward, and maybe that should be put into the report, or the other adjacent townships. So some of the properties that are right adjoining Smiths Falls proper, there could be overflow there that, those townships could look to adopt some of these similar policies for those areas in order to facilitate some housing in Smiths Falls. So I just think it's something that we should capture, and as maybe a recommendation that we forward to them, to say, that if you look at the map, I've got it open here now on my other screen, the other side of Lombard Street is, Highway 15 or Lombardy Street is actually not in Smiths Falls, right? So there's areas around there that could be that could take a similar approach is, I guess, the point that I'm trying to make.
Chris?
Yeah, service is the biggest issue, Sean, with those are all, the well and septic just don't permit over densification. We've looked at 17 units out in by the golf course, for example, and the size of the lot required just doesn't, it just doesn't bode well for like the townships. If it's on town services, it would work fine, but on septic and well, the second that you get into over 10,000 liters a day in septic, you require the Ministry of Environment approval, which nobody wants to get.
Right.
So we need a boundary adjustment.
So the Walmart, for instance, right, is not technically in Smiths Falls.
No,
But
it
is
is.
it on Smiths Falls services?
So it is now.
Sorry?
No, it is Smiths Falls now, but that was a deal made. Yeah, so Rideau Lakes, and that was a boundary
Okay.
adjustment made years ago to move that into the town in order to ensure.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But that's a good example though, where a boundary adjustment was made to accommodate. Carl, you to comment on this?
Well, I was going to just jump in with the conversation with the question about boundaries and the service and constraints. So I think it's a great point. Definitely, we want to take a regional approach, and certainly folks who are living and shopping folks who are shopping and working in Smith Falls but living out in the townships, definitely they're part of this as well, though perhaps somebody who's looking at an acre may not necessarily be that same person who's looking at somewhere in town. People probably either want to live out in the townships or in the urban area. But I appreciate the suggestion, Sean, and absolutely we want to look at the regional perspective.
Well, there is a fair amount of land very close to the canopy facility, which is of course Montague. Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, Gallipo Center. That's
Chris,
already in the,
yeah.
Sorry, with the Gallipo Center at 300 and some acres is something that we certainly have to look at. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm. Pauline?
I agree with Sean simply because I went to look at that development that Rideau Lakes did in Elgin, which was for seniors, which was affordable housing that was built in quads that is on septic and well. And it's really a great piece of affordable housing. And something like that, if other townships did it near us, Montague, for example, it works into the same idea that I agree with Chris, you can't do huge density, but that was, I think there's I think there's 16 or 12, I've forgotten how many units are there, but they're very different because the septics are very different there because they're built in sort of quads. But I think it's great to have an approach that encompasses our surrounding townships, just so we can get some synergism.
Good. Chris?
Sean, we built that thing in Elgin, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. That it's 4 fourplexes, but it had a cost back then of around 3-point-some million for 16 units at $200,000 a door. It's just not cost prohibitive. Or it's cost prohibitive, no question about it. They must have, unless there was government involved.
Any comments regarding secondary dwellings? Sorry?
Oh, sorry, to Chris's comment, we do have a draft plan that was submitted, so we're working through that with Carl for the entire property out of the Gallipo Center. And I do agree with Chris. We had looked into doing some multi-units on rural properties, and it's just not feasible with the septic and then the well testing and everything that goes along with it with the ministry. So
Sorry, Sean, we have lots of land in Smith Falls, lots of land. We have to just develop the best way we can. That's as simple as that.
Which is what I guess any zoning changes will hopefully help motivate people to do that. So we just want to talk a little about Airbnbs and temporary rentals. we don't have an Airbnb policy now. I think there's certainly some thoughts that we should. I believe we have some Airbnbs in town. I don't know how many. Polly, maybe you come across it more often, but any comments with regards to the short-term rentals and how that may be impacting our local supply of permanent rentals?
I've noticed a lot of short-term rentals pop up lately that would be otherwise like bed and breakfasts or other sort of things that accommodate that sort of like short-term vacations, etc. And the rent is astronomical. And for not being able to bring in any of your own furniture or anything like that, I've noticed a lot of them popping up just with the pandemic coming on.
Pauline?
Short-term rentals are actually illegal under COVID unless the people are need housing because of COVID. So all of the Airbnbs and all that are covered under the Premier's announcement. The interesting thing about that, though, and I'm going to tell you from a personal standpoint, is during the pandemic, more than any other time, I've been reached out by both former clients and colleagues to say that we have women who are in very abusive situations trying to get out of them. And therefore, short-term rentals were massively needed. It's actually quite, it's a news story that you don't hear a lot of, but it's part of what is going on in the pandemic. So a lot of those short-term rentals, though, have accommodated people at different price points during the COVID. But Vicky, to your point, right now it's illegal for them to be doing short-term Airbnbs just for the purpose of somebody having a vacation. The rules are pretty strict on it. So we have a huge problem going into the summer, even in terms of people whose income has come from short-term rentals, who bought properties with the idea that they were going to rent them out this summer, for example, on the waterfront, which at the moment they can't do legally. So it's just the pandemic has caused some unique problems. But on that note, I know probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4 Airbnbs in the town, and none of them that I know have caused any problems. So it's interesting. There are people, some of them are people who live part of the year elsewhere and rent it out when they're not here. And some people have bought simply for the investment purpose. But I can't think, and it would be a question to the chair, whether the police have had any trouble, or we've even heard of any trouble with any of the Airbnbs that exist.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. It's never come up at any PSB meeting we've had. So there may be, but not to my knowledge. Lorraine?
Yeah, no, to that point, we had one across the road from us, beautiful Victorian house that's a 5-bedroom Airbnb that's now rented to a family for, I think, for an extended period of time, but we had no problem with them. Many of the people that were there would be there for a week, a month, 3 months. Many of them worked at Canopy and, just became part of the neighborhood. I didn't see any problem with it at all. And that's the only one that I've been close to or knew about. But in terms of an issue, I think it solves some of the problems we have with hotels. Some of the people that are Canopy, they get a 3-month term because they're an engineer or electrician or some special kind of program that they're doing, and they need 3 months or 4 months. And then they want to have somewhere to go home to every day, the same place, rather than having to go from hotel or place to place or to travel from out of town. So I don't see the Airbnb a problem.
Vicky?
I just wanted to iterate. I don't think it's a problem of putting like a strain on any of our police services. I think it's just a matter of putting a strain on what could be available as a full, like a full-term rental as opposed to short-term. And then if there's problem with like Tweed not having enough rentals, then that comes down to really the housing crisis instead of just allowing, like having more available short-term rentals. If they were working here, they would want to live there, right?
Pauline?
But just to help you understand, Vicky, the short-term rentals also are, for example, I sit on the physician recruitment team for the hospital. So when we have physicians who come in who sometimes come for a 3 or 5 month time frame to see if they like Smith Falls, if they like the hospital, or come here because we need a specialist or somebody's taking over a physician's practice for a short term because they're away. Those short-term rentals are really important because we need to find them something that is furnished because they're coming without furniture, which is really important. And so even in terms of, you know, people who, and Lorraine's a good example, the people at Tweed sometimes who come for 3 months aren't coming back. It's not a housing crisis for us. It's a short-term housing thing. So in both Perth and Smith Falls, we have traditionally needed furnished short-term rentals to, which is a different housing need, but it is an important housing need so that they can't become year-round. They have during COVID become that simply because there isn't the opportunity, and sometimes there's been a need that people have been, you know, their housing hasn't been available, or they were supposed to move into a house that needed renovations and the contractors weren't working. And so they've needed that sort of longer term rentals. But I have to tell you, we still have a need for that market in Smith Falls. Without it, we would be in a terrible situation when we're looking at physician recruitment or professionals coming for any of our factories or anybody coming to, you know, look at a short term. They'll never be here year round, but we need short term. So.
Good. Josie?
Yeah, I agree with Pauline there. I know that I just looked it up online, and there's 4 places in Smith Falls, like in Smith Falls proper, not including what's on the lakes, that are Airbnb available. So I don't think we have like a major issue with Airbnbs. And I also know people who have a spare unit that they can use for Airbnb, and oftentimes it's 3 to 4 month Tweed stays, people who are coming to work for 4 months that live in Guelph normally or something. So it's filling that need. My partner and I have like a 1-bedroom, like little section at the back of our house that we've been hosting med students and doctors for the hospital as well. And they come for a couple of months, and they need a fully furnished apartment. So we're just kind of filling that need there. But that's sort of my 2 cents on that.
Super, thank you. Any further comments here? Jeff?
I would just say Airbnb can also be an affordability issue for people that are paying down a mortgage. It's a way that they can help them to create affordable housing that at some point they may get tired of cleaning sheets and rent it out as a full-time unit, but it helps people pay down their mortgages. So it's not all bad.
No, good point. So I think the consensus here seems to be that there's a fairly small number of Airbnb units or short-term rentals in town, not a significant impact on overall supply of rentals, and with a critical need to have these in our community to meet the needs of professionals who are in town or visitors on a temporary basis. So I think I don't think we'll spend a lot more time on that, or one of Carl spend a lot more time on that. I want to ask a few questions just regarding minimum lot size. So we look at the older part of town on big lots, and you cross the river, you've got, for the most part, smaller lots, and then with new development, smaller again. Carl's report indicates that there is some possibilities of even going smaller, which would create more intensification. Any thoughts on that? Vicki?
My worry is that if we lower the sizes, like it's a good thing in that we can create more housing, but I worry that the price won't change, so to speak. And I know we don't have very much say in that, but that's sort of what I worry, is that we might be causing an effect where we're shoving as much space and much people into a small space as possible, whereas we're maximizing profits instead of maximizing what we actually need. That's just my theory, anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Vicki, to your point,
further
the only
comments?
way sorry.
Looking for Lorraine.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead,
No,
Chris.
go ahead, Chris. He started.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
your point, the only way to reduce rent is to make the unit sizes smaller. It's not, when you build a new building, it's an X number of dollars per square foot. You need X number of dollars to cover a mortgage. So unfortunately, the only way to reduce rent is to reduce the size of the unit itself.
Valid comment. Lorraine?
That's fair. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, you know, I hope I don't ever need a smaller space, but if I did, I sure wouldn't want to do lawns. And I think a lot of people as they retire are looking for a lot size that's pretty and nice and it's got a little bit of fresh air space, but not monstrously large to do, you know, lawn care and all of that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of different needs we have, but I think the smaller size of new builds, especially if we're making them appropriate for seniors' retirement, I think it makes sense to have smaller lot size.
Well, we're seeing that with the townhomes on Ferrara as well. And Carl mentioned that already in his report that we've already made changes to accommodate those. And who else had a comment? Chris, you had another comment?
I just asked the committee, what is an appropriate rent for a senior, let's say? I know it depends on income and everything else, but, or sorry, I want to go, what size unit is, Lorraine, what size unit would you move into if you're moving in to someplace? Is it 1,000, 1,200 square feet?
I'd have to have, I don't know, I'd have to have a large living area. The bedroom I wouldn't need many bedrooms, maybe 1, 2, but I'd need a large living area just because I have large things and I don't want to give them up. I mean, I hope I never have to make that decision, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Pauline?
What we're finding is that the seniors who are looking to move, who are going into housing first and not direct, because one of the interesting things that's happening is our seniors in Smith Falls are capable of staying longer in their larger single family residences because there's lots of people who will cut their lawns, shovel their snow, and do the jobs that they need. So, but when they're moving, and I have one right now, surprisingly, they want 2 bedrooms. And the second one is sometimes for family, but also just because they want some space for an office. So we're finding, you know, that 1,000 square feet, 800 square feet is more what they're looking at and not 400 square feet, for example. But and by the way, I agree with Carl on what happened with the townhouses. Interestingly enough, it's not, because those new townhouses are bungalows on one side and 3 stories on the other. But what we're seeing there too is single parents are looking at those who also don't need a lot of lawn or don't want a lot of lawn. And they're within walking distance of the school, which has a play yard on weekends if, you know, they had a play structure. That, you know, anyway, but that's sort of, not everyone wants to move into the tiniest of dwellings. So that's the interesting thing about seniors, because like Lorraine, they have still lots of stuff that they're not going to get rid of yet.
Josie?
So I just have a question, I guess. I know that we surveyed some of the landlords in town. Do we have the ability, or have we already done this, surveying the people, like we've talked about how there's like big long housing lists and people get phone calls all the time about housing need. Like what are the housing need? Like, are there a lot of people who are fine with a smaller unit and no lawn? Like how many people are there? Are they families? Are they just older couples or singles, like tweed workers, short-term, long-term? Like it would be cool to be able to go down these lists of people and find out.
Actually, so you're getting ahead of us on the agenda. That would be item D for the survey. So well done, Josie.
Copy that.
Okay.
Transition.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Let's. Has Corey joined us? Corey there? Nope. Okay.
No, Corey nor Kelly has.
Okay. Well, that's understandable. They're both heavily engaged with pandemic issues. Okay, so any other comments before we move ahead? I don't see, oh, Josie?
Sorry, I actually have to get to another meeting at 10, so I'm gonna have to sign off, so I apologize. I think my overall comment that I was going to maybe wait until after the root cause discussion was, I mean, just bring it back to where we're putting our eggs. Like I know that this committee, we're looking at sort of the material, physical things that we can do right now for incentivizing development and zoning and tax abatements, etc. But I also just want to keep on bringing back that discussion of like the housing first. And for a lot of folks that are moving into or that are requiring affordable housing, like Pauline was saying, like people that are fleeing domestic violence or whatever the situations are, whatever precarity there is, just continuing to have that discussion about the social and community development pieces. And so like I know there's some really great work that we can do with bylaws and incentives for developing, but I don't think that we should necessarily put all of our eggs in the basket of private sector interventions into this issue. So anyways, I know that we talked in the past about having like a separate, maybe a subcommittee or maybe this bigger picture further down the road thinking, but just continuing to bring that piece back up, that I don't think that if you build a building, you're not necessarily responsible for the people inside. And so I think that that's something to continually think about.
Well, good point, Josie. And I think when it comes to our interim report, obviously the root cause discussion is going to be part of the interim report, and maybe further consideration for a housing first type of policy would be, again, something we can bounce off the community and bounce off council and have further discussion on. So thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, let's move on. Any further comments here before we move on? I don't think I see any hands up. Nope, okay. So let's go to the root cause discussion. And Jeff?
I just have a quick question for Carl about minimum lot sizes. And I wonder, Carl, is there a town that you look up to that's similar to Smith Falls that's done some of this work in the past that we could maybe check out?
So I don't, good question, Jeff. I don't have an answer for that yet, but definitely when we're investigating some options and some specific numbers, I'll come back with some comparables.
Okay.
Okay. So I think there are a lot of key elements that within the zoning opportunities that can make a difference. So we look forward to seeing more on that, Carl, in the future. Does everybody have the root cause PowerPoint in front of them? If we have the details, Corey's not here. I'll just walk through it. Corey would have done a better job of explaining it, but for those, you're probably all aware that we had a subcommittee break off and work on root cause discussion. And Corey has compiled all this together into a report outlining, I guess, a focus area, and is it something that we can impact, or is this sort of boiling the ocean issue that it's too big for us to possibly consider making an impact on. There's some overlap here, obviously, with what we've seen already, what we discussed so far. But when it comes down to it, I guess we go on at the start: construction costs, development process, a lack of incentives, cost for landlords to own right-sized spaces, locations, disability access. The overall impact was that we do an impact on that by ensuring the process to develop, build, and own is fair, cost-effective, and able to be managed within reason. And so some of what we discussed so far within a CIP, if we're able to waive planning fees, provide incentive for affordable housing, if the zoning is already changed to accommodate greater density rather than having to put a developer through a rezoning process. So the overall consensus was that we have an impact on that. And if you have any questions or comments through this, just let me know. slumlord and bylaws, bylaw enforcement. And Carrie, when was the last time a property standards bylaw was redrafted? It's been quite a while, right? Is that something up for review in the near future?
Yeah, property standards was 2014, 2015.
Okay.
But yeah, it should be
fairly,
reviewed.
fairly current. Okay.
5 years
and
is
then,
usually
yes,
the
there's an
lifespan.
impact there. One of the discussions we had was just the overall quality of living space of tenants. I would go to the slumlord issue, people who are not maintaining buildings, and there are a lot. I do get complaints every now and then about the inside of a unit, about the quality of living condition. I've had cases of people with cockroaches and those types of concerns. And so our bylaw, property standards bylaw, does not necessarily speak to the interior of properties.
No.
Correct, Carrie?
No, it doesn't.
Is that something that we do have some autonomy to impact?
Not to a great deal. We can the outside of a property, but the inside of a property starts bordering on privacy issues and things like that. There's not a lot really we can do for the inside unless there's a health and safety risk or a fire safety risk or something of that nature.
The fire building health unit.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Lorraine,
there
you had a
are
comment?
issues reporting and things that.
I had a question. Some of the old houses, many of them are getting revamped and improved greatly, but many of them had what I felt before I became a counselor even, were too many apartments, and some of them were very, very small. And sometimes they're in the basement of an old house. I mean, the window size would be like a very small basement window. And when you go by the building, you think that's the only window that this senior has. It just doesn't seem right to me. I don't know what the size of the inside is, but it appears that there's a door that goes into them. And then this tiny little apartment has one little window, which I don't know if that in the bylaw talks about space and air and quality of what an apartment should have. I don't know.
It's also
it worries me. I just
fire
think
egress
how
too,
I would
fire safety, but
It's fire issue.
yeah. But who
yeah,
looks
Carrie,
after
those
that,
issues.
Sean? That's the thing that I've often.
Carl. Yeah.
I could speak to that, Sean.
Well,
because it is
Carl,
property.
Carl or Carrie, whichever one you want to speak to this. Okay, sure, go ahead.
So a lot of those ones, Lorraine, are ones that people have never taken a building permit out for. They've just gone ahead and kind of quartered up their building or butchered their building. So as fire or building become aware of those, they go and investigate. But a lot of that's dictated as well by the fire code and the building code. So as they become aware, they obviously go to inspect, because under the fire regulations, obviously we want to make sure that there's two ways out and they have the proper detectors in place. But a lot of those were done through the years with absolutely no permit in place. So there's a lot of things like that that we're just not aware of.
I think Vicky was next.
Sorry, myself?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Vicky.
Okay, so in order, I think to eradicate slumlords and the bylaws, we'd have to just hold an education sort of meeting, just to let tenants know their rights and responsibilities, and like having Linda Tranter would be very beneficial, like we discussed before. I think that would be the best thing we could do for that route, because I don't think there's any really other legal obstacles we can take, and plus we don't really want to get into the nitty gritty. We just want people to be able to solve their own issues in a sense.
Good point. Chris, you were next.
Well, the example on Phillip Street where the council has just approved that Mr. O'Connor's development. And we're allowing a basement apartments, yet we're dead against them with one window. How that's not an old that's not an old building. That's a new building that's going to be constructed. And Lorraine, that was you that just said that. Oh, they already have one window. Well, that's the exact same thing we just approved. Go ahead.
Well, it's the size issue that Sean or Chris, when the apartments that I'm talking about are in an old house basement, not in a new build where you have probably 8 feet of space. I don't know what this apartment would have, but it appeared to me that it was a very small space, whereas the new build would be, it would have to match what's appropriate for what's the code for the building. I think that's what's different. To me, anyway.
Okay. Carl, do you have a comment on that?
So with respect to the property on 8 to 10 Phillips Street, so I don't have the square footage in front of me for those lower level apartments. They're certainly larger than the minimum, but they're also more than half the grade is, or more than half the I guess the height of the downstairs unit is above grade. So there's certainly more room for windows, that entrance, egress, that sort of thing. So I believe they're technically not classified as the lower level, but I believe they don't meet the strict zoning definition for basement based on that.
Okay, thank you. And Pauline, you had a comment?
I just wanted to, one of the follow-ups for slum landlords by a tenant is the fact that they can appeal to have their rent decreased until such time as a landlord does. I was in a fourplex this winter that was had been in poor condition, and the tenant had applied and gotten their rent decreased on the items that needed to be fixed until their rent went back up to whatever it was previous to that. So part of that is, maybe it's an education of tenants, but I do know that tenants have availed themselves of appealing the amount of their rent until repairs are done. And they are interior, exterior, they have to do with the safety of their unit or the difficulty with, perhaps stairs that don't have a railing or whatever.
So basically here, the overall suggestion from the working group was a policy review and tweaks to ensure it reflects the goals of the task force. And then, as mentioned by Vicky, tenants have their rights. They can utilize the legal clinic for support. And then sometimes it's the tenant has the right to complain to building or bylaw for support. And also our firefighters do inspections on larger buildings, and I don't know if there's a opportunity, Carrie, maybe you can help to have them do smoke alarm checks on even duplexes or triplexes, or to the more opportunity they have to walk into a unit and make sure a fire smoke detector is in place, the more opportunity they have to see if there's greater risk. So that might be something we could also, as a recommendation, to come bring forward.
That's a great point, Sean. And I know the previous fire chief had started down that road of inspections with commercial multi-res. And it's a great question because I don't know where it was left off on. So definitely something I'll make sure in the minutes and follow up with Chief Cheeseborough on.
Great, thank you. Okay, going down to the next item would be just, I'm really conscious of time here. The Not My Backyard, education rights, tenant skills, stereotypes, and that's something, again, we think education and awareness. So I think we want to carry forward, bring that as a recommendation, that what role can we play in trying to help communicate to the community. Spousal loss, looking at how to support those who want to stay in their homes, keep people in their existing homes. There was a suggestion that we could have an impact on that. And I'm not sure, I don't recall why we believe we could have an impact on that. Anybody else who's part of the group wants to speak up, but that seems like something that might be difficult for us to work with. Lorraine?
Yeah, I wondered, the night of the coldest night of the year, I spoke to a lady who was renting a bedroom. And she was in a home somewhere in Smith Falls where some other ladies were also renting a bedroom. I'm just wondering if this group is that something someone can do legally? I mean, it was serving a good cause. This lady had nowhere else. They shared the kitchen unit, but each woman had their own bedroom, but they shared sort of the living space. And she felt it was working really well. It was just that it wasn't going to be a permanent situation. It was just temporary. But I wondered where that kind of living fits into what we're doing.
Anyone has a comment, Jeff?
That's in essence an Abbeyfield home that more and more communities are embracing that model. The beauty in it, Lorraine, not as a temporary housing option, but one that offers help reducing social isolation, because
yeah,
often
that's,
single people
that's exactly what I was thinking, Jeff.
together.
Yeah.
So
because
I think it's something that we should be embracing, actually.
or at least looking into, for sure, I think.
For the sake of the group, there's fellow Jim Galloway, who is the former Canadian president of the Abbeyfield Society of Canada, who lives just across in Quebec. And we've been talking with him a little bit. In fact, Aaron Lee and Fraser and I there to meet with him to do kind of a business case for Abbeyfield. And we were to meet, I think it was the day that the province shut down because of the pandemic, but we're going to get back at it. And we could actually bring him to a meeting and have him speak if you like.
Yeah, no, I think when, I mean, my mother-in-law lives in a beautiful little bungalow all in one level, and she's, looked after really well, but she's just lonely. The pandemic is making that worse, of course, but she's lonely all the time because she's there and she doesn't have a car and she can't walk very well. So I think there's a lot of situations where that kind of living would be very beneficial.
I think,
Karen? Oh.
Could I just have some clarification? So this particular type of living arrangement, are there bylaws against that currently?
Carl or Carrie?
I defer that one to Carl.
Good.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we knew about it, Karen. I think that the issue was that people were doing it, but I'm not sure if anyone really knew it was happening. That's the first time I'd heard about it.
Okay, so then my thought would be that that's an avenue that could be explored for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
One of the issues has to do with ownership, because it's multiple people that own the building.
If it's shared ownership.
Person who rents to others, but often people get together and actually own, much like you would own a condominium.
Right.
Carl, I'll give you some opportunity to speak before Vicky.
It's a tricky thing because our zoning bylaw defines dwelling unit as a household, but it also doesn't define a household. So we can't get into zoning for differentiating based on whether somebody's a family member or not a family member. So it's not something we can certainly easily enforce. And for instance, we hear a lot of like the shared, I'm hearing in some communities, they're looking at these shared large houses where a bunch of different people buy particular ownership shares. And I don't see anything wrong in zoning for that if it still functions as a single household with their own bedrooms and a shared kitchen, shared living space. So it's not. It's definitely an interesting scenario.
Vicky?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but do Abbeyfield houses, they're supposed to be along the lines of like having amenities in them, like bowling or swimming or different things to do inside of them? Am I correct?
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Not necessarily. It's got to do with the shared living space. And one of the things, research that we may want to do is the new Golden Girls Act, because that's what this is all about. And I haven't read the act, but that's what it's about, is this kind of living arrangement to make it happen, actually.
So I think that would be more of a responsibility for like a private or nonprofit company to go in and take the reins of and become the, like if they wanted to become the landlord of that, they could, because otherwise it would just be like a group of people collectively deciding either to buy or rent a house, and then they'd have to decide who's the landlord, and then that gets really tricky. But I think we're straying away from just the housing, like the simplicity of housing. We just need to build housing. We don't need to build extravagant housing. And if there's a problem of like maybe loneliness, we could perhaps link up with different like social groups like throughout the town. We could have like a meeting at the Legion or something like that that gives us community events, because I know not everybody's linked to Facebook where a lot of the events aren't posted.
I would say that this, sorry, Sean, I would say that this is not necessarily extravagant housing by any means. It's more of the social model of people coming together. You can, typically what happens in an Abbeyfield home is you have your own bedroom, you share common space. Typically, because you're saving that kind of money and living communally, you can afford someone that can come in and do some cooking as you get older and some cleaning as you get older. The kinds of things become more difficult as you get older. So it's certainly not about extravagant housing with swimming pools and bowling alleys. It's more about the social model of not
just worry that
room apartment by yourself, but living in a house with 3 or 4 other people.
Yeah, we're focusing on like the amenities of it though, but there's people literally without a house. We need to focus on those people first.
Yeah, but I think if these...
Yeah, Pauline?
Through the chair to Carl. Carl, we have a rooming house bylaw, and I think of sometimes, and to take it to affordable housing, rooming houses, and I know they exist, but they're also very much affordable housing, because I know through my interaction with the food bank, for example, coming into Thanksgiving, I was told, you know, there are people who access the food bank who don't have a full kitchen, who, you know, perhaps live in a rooming house type dwelling. So is our rooming house, and I apologize, I haven't looked at it, very restrictive to where those exist, or and the bylaw that surrounds them? Because that's another option.
Yep. So our zoning bylaw defines a rooming house, and it allows them as a permitted use in the R4 zone. And the R4 zone is actually fairly substantial. It covers a lot of the north of the Rideau area and some of the south. But there's most different zoning categories have specific lot sizes where there's a number of where to meet a particular use, it needs to be set back a certain area, it needs a larger lot, for instance, just to manage the density.
So I attended a session on affordable housing at the AMO conference, Rural Conference in Toronto in January, and part of the discussion was on shared accommodations like this. And it was from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and they are coming forward with some directive and policy, I believe, on this to help encourage it. So I think it should be part of our interim report, and we can see some feedback from the community. Various models. Some are from corporate owned, where they rent out individual rooms to people, someone who owns their own home, rents out rooms to other people, to the Golden Girls model, where they own the house together and share everything together. So, but I think it's a model to help eliminate social isolation for people, for seniors, or people with disabilities, or various people, and of course, from affordability standpoint, it makes a lot of sense too. So we'll stop the discussion on this at this point. We have more on the agenda, but I think I think we all agree it should be part of our interim report. And moving forward on the agenda, I believe I'll go back to the agenda here. Survey. Okay, so we're going to come up with and we can almost talk about interim report and survey sort of at the same time to some extent. So we want to be able to reach out to the community. I think we've had some real progress with this group over the last 6 months now, I guess, right? Despite a pause in there for a couple of months. We want to be able to share, put together into report to, and then seek feedback from the community, I think, on the progress that we've made, on some of the policies that we can implement, some of the actions that the municipality can take, some of the models that may be suitable that we have not really contemplated that much in the past, as well as, so there's I guess in my mind, there's two parts to the public feedback. It's that part of it, and then a survey with Josie that made the reference to it. Can we get some feedback from not just from the tenant community and from landlords, and what type of information should we be gathering with regards to people's needs and people's wants, the challenges people are facing. So if we go back to when we first started, we did a bit of a SWOT analysis, and so I think if we sort of use that fundamental thought process to say, okay, what do we want to gather from the community? So maybe I'm jumping around here a bit, but I would say we need a survey to gather information, and then we need a method for public feedback on our interim report. Understanding public feedback will not likely be the same now or in the near future as what it would have been when we started this process. We would have held some public meetings, we would have had people come out and had some discussion. So we have to be prepared to act differently considering the current climate. So, Chris?
Okay, yeah, that would be wonderful. Like we're the 110 units that we're doing across from the mall is already 1,000 to 1,400 square feet. We want to know over at Bellamy Farms what target. We would love to find out what target we're looking for. Are we looking for 800 to 1,200? Are we looking for 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom? What rent? So that would be a great tool to help us as a developer to figure out what in 2 years, what's our next move?
Okay. Anyone else? Lorraine?
I just would add to that you could have the parking issue, you could have so many of these issues in that questionnaire, and it's going to have to be done online. That's the only, some kind of a problem. Maybe you don't have to have a computer, unless, I don't know how else we would do it right now with what we're going through.
Sorry, in the town.
Well, we ever speak up.
Pardon?
Well, we have the Speak Up Smith Falls tool.
And is it getting enough feedback, do you think, that this would get?
Yeah, we will never hit everyone. We can consider the possibility of including something with the water bills.
Yes, that's what I was going to suggest. Yeah.
The challenge will be putting something together and gathering that feedback and compiling that feedback. We probably don't need thousands of responses in order to get a clear picture. So we could start probably with an online tool and go from there. Most people, we won't have everybody, but most people likely will have access to a computer, to a phone, some method of doing that. Vicki?
No, I was just making sure it was going to be online as well and not just directly with water bills.
Yeah, because the water bills and tax bills don't hit the tenant community, right? And that's 42% of our population, and that's many of the people we feel are more at risk, obviously, of housing affordability.
Yeah.
Any other, Pauline, and then Jeff?
The one group that has the ability to touch all those tenants often is the landlords. So those group that you surveyed, I know that some landlords still receive their rents and still have rental offices that they need to receive them in. And they have the access to their own tenant base. So the list we had, I realized when we did it, Cindy Rivington Management wasn't part of that. And so she has a huge group of tenants, obviously. But I'm just thinking that's a great area that they could put a notice in their mailboxes, reach out to them, because they're in contact and we're coming into, another rental cycle.
Perfect. Jeff, and then Karen. Jeff, oh, no audio, Jeff.
Sorry about that. I was thinking of something that's probably messy as hell, but because you have such a high number of tenants, is there some way you could put something in the paper, the questions in the paper, and then that they could phone the town dedicated line and leave their answers? That would mean someone would have to type it all up, but I'm just thinking because you have such a high number of tenants in town, it would be a number of different ways would be.
Well, Jeff, good point. Maybe it's a matter of the public announcement that we're doing this. And then Dave, I don't know if you're listening, or Carrie, having rather not just online submission, but people who could phone in and answer yes or no or whatever to questions on a voice recorded system. Or I'm not sure that's the method of doing that. I'm sure.
We can
Karen
look into that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Karen.
What about having hard copies of the survey? If you're going to get at this soon, delivered with the meals that are going out through the churches and other community agencies. A large percentage of population receiving those meals are tenants, and affluence clearly is an issue. You know, it's not there. And I'm wondering if that would be an opportunity, because those meals are delivered, certainly from our church, could go out with meal delivery.
Great idea, Karen. Thank you for volunteering St. John's for, yeah, I understand about 150 meals being delivered daily, so that could reach a good portion of the population. And even if they could drop them off and then pick them up another time, and then we can collect them all at St. John's when they're
just don't tell anybody I volunteered.
I can't imagine where they thought the idea came from.
Well, but it is a thought, and we're not the only organization who is doing this. So there may be other groups that are being hit, not just who's on our list. If you approach the other organizations.
Well, and it may be a matter too of some of us, maybe a couple of us going to Trinity or Hanley Hall during one of these lunches and simply surveying people, be 6 feet away and say we want to take 1 minute of your time and ask you half a dozen questions. So yeah. Good point. Pauline, did you have your hand up, or just Chris? Go ahead, Chris.
Can we maybe set up a task force to get the questions going, Sean, if you don't mind, like half a dozen or 3 or 4 people? I would love to spearhead that for sure. I just think Emily in our office, or Lisa, and I'm sure Tracy would volunteer somebody that we could actually start with questions, and then as a group we could even vet them before we send it out. Well,
the tenants that the sort of landlords that Jennifer and her team had reached out to was representative of, I think, 300 and some or 400 and some units in town. So that would be a great opportunity to gain the feedback. And yeah, so Carrie, perhaps you can reach out to the task force, ask for 2 or 3 people who want to participate in putting together the survey questions.
Yeah, I can do that after this meeting. And Carl and I put together a really kind of quick and dirty list of questions, Chris, but when this meeting adjourns, I'll clean that up a little bit before I send it out. But yeah, maybe we'll get 3 or 4 people, and we obviously do it for virtual meeting or email, but we can get that done hopefully this week.
I'd be interested in that as well, Carrie. I have Melanie could look after that for us and kind of spearhead that on our end.
Okay, I'll send out an email after the meeting.
Carrie, Tracy's also interested in setting up a rooming house at the Gallipo Center, in case you're wondering. So she would like 1,000 people, Tracy.
Christopher.
Okay, any other comments on the survey? I don't see any. So interim report. I think we've got, as I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of meat coming out of this, and a lot of potential strategies and tactics and policy that can make a difference. So we'll, between, I guess, Carrie, Carl, and I, we'll put together an interim report and share that. Well, I suppose that could probably that'll be sharing that will likely be our next meeting. And so maybe able to do it in an hour. Once the report is done, it can be circulated, and then we can get together and walk through it and look for feedback and refinement before it gets circulated to the broader community. Does that seem reasonable? Carrie?
John, can I just ask, do you want to have the survey done and results in before the interim report, or the report done and then the report kind of dictates the questions we're going to ask in the survey for the final?
I'll ask for feedback before I make my comments on that. What's the group's thoughts? Anybody? Pauline?
I think I'd like the survey done, and then it's just part of the report. So I think we go ahead and get the survey done, so at least we can look at, perhaps there's something we don't know or haven't even thought of that may come out of the survey.
Karen?
I would certainly echo that, because I think it would be a more comprehensive interim report to have that information available.
Jeff?
I was thinking the other way around, and either way I think could work, but the way I was thinking is if you had an interim report go out, you're more and telling people that we're doing a survey before the final report, you might get better results of the survey, that's all.
Your thoughts? So I lean towards getting the survey while the interim report is being completed. And the survey can be included in that, and then obviously seek public feedback on the interim report as well, before we refine it and deliver a final report. So we are now mid-May. We've got about, well, the commitment was to have this wrapped up by the end of June. I think we can still do that as long as staff have the capacity to work on the interim report. So I would say if we can get the survey out in some methods this week, we don't need to get 1,000 responses, obviously, to get a good cross section of the community, but we'll look at a variety of options to get that circulated, get the feedback. The interim report can be worked on in the meantime. Do we see, I guess I'll put you guys on the spot, Carl, Carrie, do we think 2 weeks is a reasonable time frame to be able to come up with an interim report by the end of May?
So I think it depends on what we would look to, how fleshed out we would like the interim report to be. I think if we're going to get the survey out this week or within the next week, I would love to be able to at least get a sense, have the interim report include at least some of the key findings from the survey, if we possibly could, even if we need to flesh out some data afterwards. Like, I think we can pretty easily put together, say, a table of contents that just includes, say, an executive summary of the items that we're looking at. But in terms of a fully fleshed out interim report that takes the form of a first draft of the final, I don't think that's going to be a bit challenging by the end of May. But we can definitely have some key points and summaries of what it is that we're looking at and preliminary recommendations.
Well, I look at it, and maybe that's animates a little quick. I don't see the final report being probably much different than the interim. It's more a matter of having public feedback and any feedback from council before the interim report becomes a final report. So yeah, maybe the next 3 weeks, or probably not much longer than that, would be adequate. And then we bounce off council and the community for a couple of weeks, and then we can have the final report by the end of June. I think all the heavy lifting has been done. I think the possible strategies and actions have all been identified. I think we've done a real thorough job of digging deep into the possibilities. Now it's a matter of getting that feedback. Any further thoughts? I don't see any hands. Oh, Carl, yeah.
I think for me and Carrie, as we put together the final report, the biggest challenge for us is going to be the implementation strategy and identifying how and who is going to be carrying out each of these, and that's something certainly where I'm going to rely on the expertise around this group to help guide that.
Well, and we've got, I guess, a lot of potential recommendations, and it may be a phased approach, obviously. And as you mentioned, CIP, which I think we all agree can be extremely meaningful. That will take some time before that could be implemented. But I guess that lands on your desk anyway. Okay. Any other concluding thoughts? I don't see any hands. So I think from a next meeting date, I don't think we can set it, to be fair, today. I think we want to try and make sure within the next 2 or 3 weeks, and it's going to be based on when staff can get an interim report ready for review. Everyone okay with that? Okay.
John.
Well, thanks for your. Hello. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah. Keep Jeff stay on after we're done here, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, everyone. Thanks for your time, attention, commitment. Enjoy the week, and we look forward to the survey getting circulated this week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.